As I continue to work on these spreadsheets for this channel, I just keep getting more and more insights. There's just so much information locked up in each one of these spreadsheets when you start examining and start thinking it through. But of all the ones I've done, this is probably the spreadsheet that most gives me the most insight of what's actually going on. And what it does is it takes the average, the 10-year average, 15 and so on, from each of these years for the returns. In other words, in 1923, if you go down here 10 years, you catch some of these reds here. The average return for 10 years was 6.96. For 15 years from 1923, if you go down through, the average would be 9.22. My whole point in showing you this, if you just look at a 10-year decade, you may have a really bad decade, and your average return might only be, in this case, 0.67. But the farther you can go out here, even in the worst case scenario, the worst 25-year average come out to 8.84, and that was in 1929. You'll see it right there. You'll also see 1929 right there. But if you can go out here, look at the average for 1929, 11.37, and for a 40-year average, 11.29. Why? Because the market always comes back. Yes, you can start out with these down years, but if you can be in it for 30, 35, or 40 years, you're going to catch these other ones. You're going to catch these good decades. But if you just have for a decade, say the 1930s or the 2000s, you're going to be hurting. In fact, it was the 2000s. If you look down through here, that's the one that averaged 0.67. But overall, the market, yes, it has its down times, but in the last 100 years, it was up 74 times and down 26 times. And if you can be in it for 35 or 40 years, you are going to catch these kind of numbers and have these kind of averages over the long run. Whereas if you're just in it for a decade or maybe 15 years, you don't have quite the returns because you get some down years. Let's actually run some numbers for you. I want to take somebody that's 25 years old. He's got 35 or 40 years till he retires. He's fresh out of college. Maybe he can't save a whole lot. Let's just have him saving $250 a month in increasing that by 3% a year. In other words, the first year is 250 and then 258. Let's actually run the numbers here. It's going to take a little while to recalculate all these. Actually, I think I'd already done that, but over a 35-year period, look at the scenario, 930,000 in the worst case scenario. If he could hang in there for 35 years and the market has returns like they did in all these different years, in other words, from 1923 for the next 35 years, we also look at the 40 years. Yep, there it is, 930,000. Imagine $250 a month after 40 years when this 25-year-old is 60. He's going to have the worst case scenario, $1.55 million. Could have as much as 4.885 and a median 2.367. That's if the numbers repeat like they did over the last 100 years. And just think about this, all the ups and downs, and yet is it really going to be much different in the next 100 years or next actually 30, 35, 40 years than what it did in the past? Is it going to be worse than the Depression? So that's why I like to run these numbers for young people that have the time, get them to see they can have these kind of numbers with just these kind of amounts and just get started at a young age. But let's take somebody else. Let's say they're 40 years old. And they've already got, in fact, if you go down through here, maybe let's just say they've got $65,000 saved up because they've been in it for a while. But again, they don't have 35 or 40 years. They're 40 years old, so they maybe have 25 years. But they're making a little bit more money. Again, I can run whatever numbers you want. Just ask me. Let's say they're making $60,000 a year. Experts recommend you put 10% into savings, so that would be $500 a month, and let's say they increase that by 2% a year because you are going to get raises. You're not going to stay at 60,000. So let's say you have $500 a month and 510. Let's see what that individual might be. $500 a month, beginning with $65,000 because they've been able to accumulate that. They're 40 years old. In the first 15 years, they were able to accumulate $65,000. Again, what's really fun to do is run these different numbers, and it's really eye-opening what the S&P 500 can do for you if you're in it for a longer period of time. If you're only in it for 10 years, you're going to get nailed on some of these bad decades. But if you can be in it for like 25 years, which we're going to see right here, 25 years with this scenario, $500 a month, 2% a year increase, and it's starting with 65,000. In the worst case scenario, in the last 100 years, an individual would have had 898,000 right here, could have had as much as 5.630, and the median would be 1.577 million. So a 40-year-old with this scenario could look for somewhere in this range. Because really, do you really think the market's going to do much better or much worse than it did in the last 100 years? It goes through cycles. It'll continue to go through cycles. So you can have this kind of money. Let's just run one more situation. Let's say somebody's got 125,000, but they're 45 years old. Better make it 125,000. We'll leave this 500 going in. Let's update this for a 45-year-old. So we're going to be looking at the 20-year column with these kind of numbers starting with 125,000. What we're saying is somebody has accumulated 125,000 by the time they're 45 years old. Again, I can plug in any numbers you want. So let's just look at this. It's still recalculating. We're going to be looking at the 20-year column because this individual is 40 years old. He basically has 20 years till he's 65. Okay, here's the absolute worst he would have had in the last 20 years, given the returns, 553,000. Again, everything seems to go back to 1929. Look at some of these other numbers, 1 million, 2 million, 1 million. The median would be 1.439. Somewhere in this column, somebody would have, in this scenario, would have had 4.391 million, and the second best is 4.281, and so on. So somebody that's 45 years old, that's already been able to accumulate this kind of money, that can put this kind of money in and increase it by that much, this is the range they're going to find most reasonably. That's not going to be any worse than the worst of the last 100 years, and not be any better. So it's going to be between 553 and 4.391, with the median being 1.439. I can keep running these numbers. There's so many things I just love to point out with you from this sheet and some of these other sheets, but I really don't want to take a lot of time. So be sure and check on some of the other videos, because I bring out lots of different points in these. But our channel is called $1 Million Made Easy. Consider subscribing. That helps the YouTube algorithm to get this channel out there, because I want these numbers out there so people can see them, especially young people that can have these kind of numbers. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please share this with others.